The worst part wasn't when he disappeared. The worst part was when he came back. Because every time you started healing, every time you stopped checking your phone, every time you finally convinced yourself it was over, there he was. A message, a reaction, a conversation, a little burst of warmth. And suddenly the future you'd spent weeks trying to let go of came rushing back. Not because anything had changed, because hope had. Because eventually you realize, the relationship isn't confusing because there was no connection. It was confusing because there was. Real moments, real chemistry, real hope, just enough certainty to let you relax into it. Not the man who broke your heart, the man who never fully chose you, but never fully let you go either. Just enough attention to keep you hoping. Just enough affection to keep you emotionally attached. Just enough possibility to stop you walking away. But never enough to build something real. And if you've ever known someone like that, you know exactly how exhausting it can be. Because the connection feels real. That's the trap. If it felt fake, you'd leave. If it felt meaningless, you'd move on. But there are moments that make you believe. A conversation that lasts for hours. A message that arrives exactly when you're starting to let go. A vulnerable confession. A compliment that stays with you for days. A look that says more than words ever could. And every time one of those moments happens, hope comes back to life. You think, maybe this is it. Maybe he's finally ready. Maybe something has shifted. Maybe all this waiting is beginning to make sense. For a little while, everything feels different. You relax, you trust, you believe. Then nothing changes. The relationship slips straight back into uncertainty. Back into waiting. Back into mixed signals. Back into wondering. Back into waiting. Hello, I'm Bernie. And I think women quietly live through relationships like this, without realizing how emotionally consuming they can become. And somehow that hurts more than the silence, because you've lost the future all over again. That's what nobody tells you. These relationships don't survive on love, they survive on possibility. And possibility can keep a woman emotionally invested for years. You start becoming an expert in him, his moods, his behavior, his patterns, his fears, his wounds, his excuses. You analyze everything. A message, a pause, a delayed reply, a look, a sentence. You tell yourself you're not waiting, but you are. You tell yourself you're not invested, but you are. You tell yourself you're nearly over it. Then his name appears on your phone and your stomach flips. And suddenly you realize you're still in it. The painful part wasn't that you cared. It was the many times you convinced yourself the next conversation would be different. How many times you believed this was finally the turning point? How many times you ignored what was happening because you preferred what might happen? Eventually, a question begins following you around. What does he actually want? And that's when the theories begin. Maybe he's scared or confused. Maybe he's been hurt. Maybe he lacks courage. Maybe he's emotionally unavailable. Maybe he's overwhelmed. Maybe the timing is wrong. Or perhaps, maybe he's protecting himself or even you. And then one day, a different thought arrives. A thought you don't particularly like. Maybe he's exactly who he's been showing me he is. Not mysterious, not complicated, not impossible to understand. Just a man who enjoys having me in his life more than he wants to build one with me. That thought hurts, because it's simple, and simple leaves nowhere to hide. For a while you resist it. Of course you do. You remember the connection, the chemistry, the conversations, the moments that felt real. You bargain with reality. One more chance, one more conversation, one more month, one more sign. You tell yourself you're being patient, understanding, compassionate. But deep down, something is changing. A quiet voice begins asking a different question. Not, why won't he choose me? But, why am I still choosing this? That's the question that changes everything, because suddenly the focus shifts away from him and back to you, back to your life, your needs, your peace, your future. You start noticing how much energy this has consumed, how many hours you've spent thinking about someone who never made a decision. How much of your emotional life has been invested in possibility? How much time has been spent waiting? And the truth finally arrives. The problem was never understanding him. The problem was accepting reality. Because reality wasn't confusing, reality was actually very clear. The confusion came from trying to make reality match hope, and those are not the same thing. The truth is that someone can genuinely like you and still never choose you. Someone can enjoy your company and still never build a future with you. Someone can care about you and still not be capable of giving you what you need. Those truths hurt, but not as much as spending another 5 years refusing to see them. That's when the power starts returning. Quietly. One day you realize you haven't checked your phone. One day you realize you haven't thought about him all afternoon. One day you make plans without wondering whether he'll suddenly appear. The world starts getting bigger again. Your life starts getting bigger again. You begin remembering who you were before all the waiting, before all the analyzing, before all the hoping. And perhaps that's the real gift hidden inside these relationships. The lesson was never about him. The lesson was about you, about what happens when a woman finally decides she deserves more than almost. Almost commitment, almost consistency, almost honesty, almost chosen, almost enough, because eventually every woman reaches a point where almost becomes unbearable. And when she does, something beautiful happens. She stops building her future around somebody else's uncertainty. She stops waiting for clarity from someone committed to confusion. She stops settling for crumbs and calling it a meal. And she begins choosing herself. Quietly at first, in small ways, a little less waiting, a little more wondering, a little more peace. Not because she stopped loving, not because she became bitter, not because she stopped believing in connection, because she finally understood her own value. And that is often the moment her life begins moving again. Not when he finally chooses her, when she finally chooses herself. And I'd love to know, have you ever had someone give you just enough to keep you hoping, but never enough to build something real? Some people keep you emotionally occupied, even without building. If you've ever found yourself emotionally stuck in uncertainty, wondering whether something was real or simply keeping you hoping, these conversations are for people trying to understand their lives a little more clearly. So if that's you, I'd love for you to like, subscribe, and stay. I would love to know if you've ever felt this way too. Let me know in the comments.